Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL Wire site that covers the Arizona Cardinals. With me, recording on a Tuesday night, with the beginning of the free agency having begun, having started, my co-host Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, and we are going to talk about actual free agency, though technically, as we're recording Tuesday night, the new league year has not happened. We've had 2 full days of free agency, or the, as people like to call it, the legal tampering period, even though it's not technically tampering when it's legal. But we've had 2 days of communication and deals being made, and the Cardinals have made a bunch of them. And holy cow, has this been maybe it's just being caught in the middle of the moment. This offseason feels crazy, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's just a lot different. I mean, we got a huge jump in salary cap, and then from there it's been, massive numbers to unexpected positions. You've got, obviously the defensive tackle market went crazy, not unexpected with like a Chris Jones, getting
Christian Wilkins getting paid that much money makes sense.
But even Christian Wilkins, who we both really liked, we both really, really liked him. That was still crazy to me because he's never been a Pro Bowler. He's never, been an All-Pro. He's a very good football player. And I think with Las Vegas, he might have a shot to get there now. But this was the first year that he had over 4.5 sacks in a season.
That's true.
And he's going to be 29.
Yeah, I will say, who it kind of reminds me of in terms of production in his career? Calais Campbell. He reminds me, he's not the same type of player, but if you look at the type of production, because Calais Campbell playing from that interior defense, he never had big sack numbers with the Cardinals, but he was always super productive in getting tackles. And if you get defensive tackles getting tackles, that's a really good player. He had 89, 98. That's something that's kind of unheard of when you play on the defensive line. And then he had the boost in sacks last season when he got up to 9. And that's basically what happened to Calais. Although I will say there's going to be a difference because Calais did get moved. He was playing, a 3-4 D end and then got moved outside in a 4-3. So he was playing a real edge position where he then blew up with the Jacksonville Jaguars. But I'm guessing if there's anyone, he's even younger than Calais was when he left Arizona. So I guess, is that kind of the hope for him?
Yeah, it's got to be, because you look at, even Calais, from 2009 until he left Arizona, he averaged, about, I think it was 6.5, 7 sacks a season. He made 2 second-team All-Pros and 2 Pro Bowls in Arizona. So, to your point, yes, I agree. It is similar, but Calais had been, a more recognizable, successful player at that point. Hell, Calais had 6.5 sacks this season.
Wow. The fact that he is still that productive and he needs to, that'd be a fantastic thing to have him come back. But it feels so. It's been so long. It's been so long.
I know it's crazy to think it's been. It's already been. This will be the 8th season. So, yeah, and you look at what he did post Cardinals. Obviously, second in the Defense Player of the Year in 2017. first team All Pro, and then 4 straight Pro Bowls. Like he was a menace. 14 and a half sacks, 10 and a half sacks. Like you said, late career kind of boost. And so I think that is the hope for Wilkins. It's crazy to me to see these numbers. I mean, you had Grover Stewart, who's over 30, end up getting a 3-year, $40 million contract.
It is. This is crazy stuff right now. But in fairness, I guess it should have been super predictable, because when you have a bump in the salary cap, it's going to get used. Agents play that to their advantage. Teams have to spend money. I mean, they can't just sit on all that money. There is a minimum amount that they have to spend cash-wise, and so cash to cap and that stuff. There's that stuff that I'm pretty smart with cap stuff. I'm like, I don't understand that. But let's talk about what we're going to talk about in this show. We've already talked a little bit about that. Is reacting to what's happened around the league, and we'll talk about the deals that we like around the league, the deals we don't like, surprises, and then we'll get into the Cardinals stuff. We'll look at their new additions. We will look at the players who are returning, and and likely at least the last part when we talk on what's coming, that'll probably be outdated by the time you listen to the show. But hey, at least you'll have our takes on it at that point. So let's start with the around the league, as we already have. Quarterbacks on the move, running backs on the move, still getting paid pretty all right, but it feels like some of those big positions, quarterback, running back, and also off the ball linebacker, and at the pass rush, some big names, they're just moving around teams. Like I don't know if those teams are getting any better, because they're replacing good players with good players, and the players are just getting more money. I will say, one of my favorite sneaky, and if y'all saw me tweet about it, or post about it on X, or tweet about it on Twitter, on Monday night, is, I know people don't love Kirk Cousins, but if y'all remember when we talked about the Falcons, because the Cardinals played the Falcons this last year, and when we previewed that game, we looked at that as a team that was like that. They and the Houston Texans were two polar opposites, because there was nothing about that Houston Texans roster overall, except for a couple of players that you were threatened by that roster. And then you got the play of C.J. Stroud at quarterback that elevated and brought that roster talent up to a winning team. The opposite was the Atlanta Falcons, where they were loaded with like quality talent at a whole bunch of places on offense and in defense, and they were just held back by quarterback play. And I know Kirk Cousins he's perennially he's good, but is he good quarterback? If there's one thing you cannot deny, he is. Now we'll have to see him coming off the Achilles. There is no doubt that he is a significant upgrade over Taylor Heineke and Desmond Ridder, and that was still a 7-win team a year ago. And so the move by adding Kirk Cousins to the Falcons, I think the one thing that it does is it is a weak NFC South, a very winnable, like the Panthers are the farthest from winning, and even they could surprise and win that division, because it's not top heavy by any means. You have a very reachable ceiling. And Kirk Cousins becomes the best quarterback in that division, and will be throwing, like, you've seen the numbers they put up. If there were a quarterback that put up Kirk Cousins numbers on the Falcons the last 2 seasons, they would have been a playoff team. Maybe he doesn't win a playoff games because it's Kirk Cousins, but like still, the Falcons fans will not be clamoring, oh my gosh, he didn't get us to the Super Bowl, because they haven't been getting to the playoffs.
Yeah, and it's interesting with that one, because I think the biggest thing that we've seen is that the quarterback market continued to go up, as you and I had talked about when the Kyler contract came out, and now, after this year, it's basically a bargain, but also it creates this, well, if he has a good season, do they need to extend him type thing? So, because we're getting to the spot now where you're talking about crazy money. I mean, I like Kirk, but like you said, my biggest concern, he'll be 36. obviously coming off an Achilles, 4 years, 180 million, but 100 million guaranteed. So basically
year one, year two, compete. After that, whatever.
Yeah. And so that's what it is. So if year 1 and 2 don't go well, they can move on after year 2 with minimal, and we'll have to see how they spread out the cap, obviously. But I do like that for them. Hopefully it gets them in the right way going. You look at some of the signings thus far, and I know this is going to sound weird because they royally botched the Brian Burns situation last year, but it's a new staff. So that's the way you have to grade this. You can't, that'd be like throwing Monty under the bus for the Kyler contract, right? Like,
right.
That's not something, like, it's something he inherited. It's not something so the fact that they were able to get a 2 and a 5, which doesn't seem like a lot, but also didn't have to pay him
$30
what
million
he just got.
Holy cow. I mean, good for him. But my goodness, the price, like, everyone's getting quarterback. Like, what used to be quarterback money only, quarterback money's going to receivers, to defensive tackles, and to pass rushers. It's crazy, the money that's going around to those guys right now.
And we'll talk about what I don't like about what they did, but I thought it was impressive that they were able to, do that and go get a couple important impact players. Now, again, I'm not overly enthusiastic about what they did, but I do understand it. And then the Dolphins, and I can't find the post on X, but there's a really intriguing post that broke down. I think they signed 6 or 7 players. Don't quote me, but I think it was 6 or 7 players, and they put out their salary, and it's starter quality players that they signed that all cost about $6 million more total than just one Christian Wilkins. And so that's, again, like, you have to look at these things and say, how does this work? And for team building. And so, if you're the Kansas City Chiefs, you have to pay Chris Jones. You don't have a choice, because outside of Patrick Mahomes, you really, I mean, Travis Kelce is very, very, very good, but he's also going to be 35 this year. So, like, after Mahomes, you don't really have the guy. I think Trent McDuffie has a really good chance to be the guy, but it's Chris Jones, so you had to pay him. But, like, when you're Miami or you're Carolina, and those are extremely good players, I don't want to take anything away from them, but when you move on from a guy who's a very good player that has never helped you get over the top to add more pieces to your puzzle, that's, I think, how you have to do it. Because in the end, what ends up happening is you have a finite amount of resources, and so you have to utilize those resources in specific ways, especially when you're not talented. Like you said, the Houston Texans coming out and kind of exchanging, but then upgrading at certain spots, like, that was an interesting dynamic. They think they're getting better. Are they better, or are they just kind of exchanging things across the board? So, I really do, again, I don't necessarily agree with the players that they signed, but I think what the Panthers did, what the Dolphins did, and not caving, not paying $30 million a year to very talented defensive players when they had so many other holes that they needed filled, it made a lot of sense to me.
Minnesota's interesting because now they are in quarterback
purgatory. What the heck are they doing?
Sam Darnold. Oh my gosh. That there's some people that still so much believe in, and I will say Sam Darnold's super talented, but he makes too many mistakes. He makes too many dumb throws. But look at what they did on the other side of the ball. And so they gave Brian Flores some absolute studs and pass rushers. and they got Aaron Jones, and they still have the receivers. Maybe, but no, I don't think. What are you going to do at quarterback? They're really going with Sam Darnold.
I can't imagine. I can't imagine that's what they do. I just can't. But I mean, like you said, it's an interesting puzzle, and you feel like that they're, like you said, they're getting better. I mean, it is interesting to me that they signed 2 Houston Texans players, and then they lost Danielle Hunter to the Houston Texans, right?
That was one of the interesting things, because I'm like, Jonathan Grenard is really good. He is quietly a super productive pass rusher. Now, is Danielle Hunter a more talented pass rusher, more accomplished in the NFL? Yes. So I can, but if you had Grenard and Will Anderson there for years, and granted, Danielle Hunt, like, that's an app, like, I don't see, that's not a downside, but I know Hunter, his time in Minnesota was done. I mean, that was a thing that was going to happen over the last couple of years. That was always going to happen. But, you know, that's going to be a fun thing there in Houston. Now, when you got Hunter and Will Anderson, you could have 2 guys with 15 sacks next season. Ugh. Good thing the Cardinals don't play the Texans next year.
Yeah, and so it'll be interesting to see how that works out. Then you had, I liked Andrew Van Ginkel they signed too.
Oh,
yes.
You
talked about him ahead of time, so I think that was a good one. Those were good. I think early signings. It got some traction for them. I'm interested in what exactly the Baltimore Ravens are doing.
Was that not the least surprising thing in getting Derrick Henry?
Yeah, and I mean, and obviously you grab who you retain Matabuke, sorry. So, it's those little things like that. So we'll see, but I think they lost a lot of guys that put up numbers for them last year. So it's going to be interesting to see how that works itself out. The other one that I liked that, I thought was a nice job, but again, I'm kind of interested to see where they go with this. And that was the Eagles signing Bryce Huff of the Jets. So Bryce Huff got a 3-year, $51-ish million deal, $34 million guaranteed, $17 million a year. He had a really, really nice year last year. He's a guy you and I talked about, could he be a fit? What would his numbers look like? Yada, yada. Obviously, he ends up in Philly. But again, another 1-year type of guy, 10 sacks this year, 10 tackles for loss, obviously career highs in both of those. And 17 million is a huge, huge number, right? In that situation. So we'll see how that works out, because they still, here's what my question is for you. I like the signing, but if they move one or both of Montez Sweat and Hassan Reddick, isn't it, again, kind of like you were just alluding to, counterproductive?
I mean, unless, obviously, moving Hassan saves money.
Right.
And maybe it is the idea of Nolan Smith, maybe they see him exploding this year. And so you get that production, but still get compensation for the guys that are departing. Because, and you and I, like Hassan, he's at that point. He's at that point where you worry about what he's going to do next once he hits that age 30. Josh Sweat, he's super intriguing. Wouldn't mind the Cardinals making a move for him. I'd prefer him over Reddick, honestly, because Gannon knows exactly what to do with him. But yeah, it's they're obviously, the Eagles are trying. they couldn't, they brought the gang back together. They basically wrote it back this past year, and it didn't work. And now you're losing guys. And so Kelsey retires, Cox is retiring, and so you got to retool a little bit. So you can't keep, like, what the Cardinals did like 2-3 years in a row. Let's try. We'll do it again, and it just didn't work. They're trying to retool, which is, it's a good move for them. It's a good, like, they go out and get Saquon. Oh, the players that are staying in their division, my goodness. It's just fun. Saquon stays in the NFC East. What, the AFC North, all those guys changing teams everywhere. It's gonna up the ante with those rivalries for sure.
Yeah, it definitely will. And even like a guy like Geno Stone ended up in Cincy. It'll be interesting to see how these things work itself out. And I think you kind of mentioned it, so we should at least run it through real quick. I thought the Houston Texans are kind of doing what you're supposed to do when you're in the position that they're in. They retained Dalton Schultz. They went and got Danielle Hunter. They went and signed
Joe
Aziz.
Mixon. They got Joe Mixon.
Aziz Al-Shahir. They signed Jeff Okudah. So like Aziz and is a guy that and Hunter, right? They get them for a good amount of time, right? So they're good signings. Whereas the other guys, they bring in for like 1 year. So it's an interesting combination of going to get trying to get guys that are middle long term. Obviously long term in the NFL is always just it's literally one play away from it not being. But I think they have them in their 5 or their 3-year plan type thing.
Yeah.
Whereas then you go take chances on guys like on Joe Mixon. You take a chance on a guy like Jeff Okudah, and you see what exactly they end up getting. So it'll be interesting. But yeah, I mean, I like what they have done. I am interested to see how it all works out, because they still have some other guys that they've got to grab. And then Hunter is, like you said, he's on the other side of the hill in terms of age. Now, we've seen pass rushers, and we just mentioned Calais Campbell, have that post-30 career success. And Hunter's a insane physical specimen. So, I don't expect that to be a thing for him. We saw locally here that, even Chandler Jones after age 30, he got the injury, and then he came back and he had a nice Pro Bowl type season, right? In 21, before, I think other mental things kind of took over at that point. But it'll be interesting to see what and how Danielle Hunter continues to go. Because, I mean, you're talking about a guy that in every season he's been healthy since 2018 has had 10 or more sacks, and in his career he only has 2 full seasons where he didn't have over 10 sacks. He's one of the more underrated players in the NFL. It's always interesting that he doesn't seem to get the love that he probably should. So we'll see. But like I said, that age 30, that's an interesting one. Yeah. But he did play the most snaps of his career this year. So, but I think you have to be excited if you're a Texans fan, because they won the division, and now it seems like bringing it back even better. I will say this: there's always the worry that year one was an anomaly, right? And that's
Giants.
Yeah. And that he comes back down to earth a little bit. So I'm actually surprised, and I know that they needed help on defense, but I'm actually surprised they haven't done anything in terms of adding more weapons, because it's their receiving corps
at least the receiving market right now is still
robust. Yeah.
And frankly, it's kind of in a holding pattern right now. There's the names out there that, like, will T. Higgins get moved? Calvin Ridley's deal is going to happen soon. Hollywood, we haven't heard anything about Hollywood yet.
Right.
Which makes me think he's probably coming back, right? Otherwise, we would have heard something. We probably, yeah. I would have imagined up to now. What about the money that the Rams threw at the guard position? Holy bonkers.
And I think we could talk about that twofold. I think we can talk about that, and I think we can talk about what the Panthers did. I don't mind it. I mean, Damian Lewis was a guy you and I talked about, right? Robert Hunt was a guy you and I talked about. But the Panthers are spending close to $35 million a year on those two. And then they did the same, and then the Rams are doing the same thing. Kevin Dotson was retained, basically got 2 years guaranteed at $16 million a year over 3 years. And then Jonah Jackson, that was the one that surprised me, because you and I really liked him. We were like, hey, this is a guy that could fit. I know that somebody I've talked to said that they were actually in on him, but at less money, because he ended up getting 3 years and $51 million with 2 years guaranteed, basically. Those are, trust me, there's very few people that have been pro guard as much as I have been for about a decade now. I think it's one of the most important positions in the league. I've always said that. I just can't imagine spending $35 million a year on that position,
especially when you had your rookie play really well at guard. Now, I know that Steve Avila, I know that there are a lot of people who pegged him as a center coming out, but he was a really good guard last year, and he obviously is moving to center because, they have two highly paid guards, and Coleman Shelton's out the door, and so it's going to be Avila, which is going to be new and interesting for them, but maybe that was always part of the plan, is that they always were planning on transitioning him to center after year one. But yeah, we kind of thought that Avila was a good possibility here. 49ers, they say goodbye to Javon Kinlaw. He heads out to the Jets, but they add Leonard Floyd. Is that, well, I think that's more beneficial to Floyd than to say Bosa, right? That he's now going to be the secondary guy to Bosa and will benefit from Bosa being over there. Kind of like Chandler Jones, one of the reasons why he picked the Raiders. Why?
Yep, Max Crosby. Yeah, and Floyd's an interesting one because it's the same type of thing. I mean, he's 32. He'll be 32 before the season starts. He's coming off, a career high 10.5 sacks. His last 4 seasons, he's got nearly 40 sacks total. I mean, it's literally like 39.5 sacks in those 4 seasons. So 40 sacks the last 4 years. But I mean, a 32-year-old edge rusher that last season only was able to play 50% of the snaps. Like, that's where my question comes in for that, is how is that going to work? It'll be interesting, man. I mean, he's a good player, and I talked to my buddy Kyle Posey, who runs Niners Nation, and I was kind of like, what's that about? And he just said it comes down to that Shanahan hates trying to rely on rookies. So we'll see how it goes. It's just it was surprising. That's what I'll say at that point. Like and then he got a 2-year deal. Now I'm sure it's like all these other ones where it's probably just 1 year, it's just a 1-year guarantee type deal, but it's interesting to see. So 2 years, $20 million. So it's not a lot by any means. but it'll be interesting to see. And then didn't they just sign somebody else too?
Probably. I don't remember. There was an interior guy, but
yeah, that's the one I couldn't remember.
Eh.
But yeah, it's like what, like you said, you lose Javon Kinlaw. They signed Jordan Elliott, who's been terrible, like legitimately terrible, in Cleveland. So
that's true. Let's move on. We talked non-Cardinals long enough. Coming up next on the Rise Up Sierra podcast, Best of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's move on and talk about. Let's go into the Cardinals moves. They were active. They've been active for the first 2 days. They've got some new players to talk about. We'll talk about them next. Coming up on the Rise Up Sierra. Back on the Rise Up Sierra podcast, Best of Cardinals talk on the web. The Cardinals made some new additions. They started with defensive players. 4 defensive players to 3-year deals. In fact, the outside additions that they've made in a change from last year, which was all 1 or 2 year deals, have all been 3-year deals. Day 1 focused on defense, all guys who could potentially start. And then their next addition was on depth. In depth, and we'll talk about the guys who are coming back in the next segment. But so the first news was cornerback Sean Murphy Bunting, who we'll remember from his days with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a pretty solid player. Played on a 1-year deal last year with the Tennessee Titans, and guess what? I think it's fairly clear that we should always watch players from the Titans, Texans, and Lions, right? Which is interesting because the deal that came out, it said 3 years and $17 million. Okay, that's actually 3 years and $25 million. Not just it wasn't like crazy money, but it certainly was more money than I expected them to throw at a cornerback. And so first of all, now they've got a legitimate starting cornerback to add to that group of young players. What did you think of that deal when you first the signing and then the deal, that the actual contract, when it can it's almost $25.5 million over 3 years?
Yeah, I'm fine with it. I mean, it's again one of those situations where you look at things and the contract, makes sense in terms of $8 million a year. It's not absurd by any means. I know it's a little more than 8 million, but $8 million a year is, it's not absurd by any means, and it gives you an opportunity to sign and try to solidify a position of need with a veteran. And then, from there, what you do is you have options, and that's kind of what we've talked about all along, is that we have wanted to see that this team has options heading into the 2024 draft more than anything. So, we'll get to later what they still need to do to give themselves that flexibility. But overall, when you look at it, they were before before the offseason started, they were below the net average. That net average spent on corners about I think it's like $19.9 million on the position, and the Cardinals were at 15. So
well, I mean, look at it. Last year they had literally 4 rookies who started last year.
Right. So now they're up, and that's good. I mean, that's where you want to be, and I get it. Like, people are going to be like, well, he's not. Well, who were they going to sign for $8.5 million? That is a corner one,
and it's not bad. Like, that's the thing. He's a solid player, and he gives them size. He gives them physicalities. 2 things that Jonathan Gannon wants there at cornerback. It also, like, going into last year, remember that the Cardinals, that you were saying Marco Wilson, he's your number 1, and Marco Wilson turned out to be terrible last year. This is the guy that has years of starting. And this is not Antonio Hamilton starting. Hamilton might be back. I think the Cardinals want him back. But He can be your depth. But now you throw in the mix, you've got a legitimate starter. You feel really good about Garrett Williams, and so now you have competition, and you still can add in, the low end veterans later on. When they sign like a Rashad Fenton before, guys that you just throw into the mix, then you're competing for that number 3, number 4 spot rather than, well, these are the guys that we've got, and you re-roll them onto the roster, and you're in a better spot that way. If Antonio Hamilton is your depth, you feel good because then in a pinch he can come in and play pretty well. But you're not saying, okay, you're our number 1 corner, which Hamilton for most of the season was their number 1 corner.
And by the way, the interesting thing is I'm now looking that is updated with Bunting on the roster. So the average spending on the corner room is $19.9 million. And the Cardinals, even with Bunting, are at 15.6. So they're $4.3 million under the average. So again, it's not like, they're still 21st in the NFL in spending on corners. So like, I think people tend to overreact to things like, oh, well, he's not good. Okay, that's fine. Like he may not be great, but they signed him specifically, for this reason. So, I'm fine with it. I think it's a good, fit.
Well, and now the next 2 moves we were happy to see. Now, they weren't names that you were expecting, but Bill Nichols, formerly of the Bears and the Raiders, interestingly enough, two defensive linemen that have both played for the Bears. So the first one they came across is Bill Nichols, defensive tackle, probably will line up as their nose this year. Replacing that Leki Fotu, who we'll talk about because he departed. 3 years, $21 million. The details haven't come out. 3 years, $21 million. So they throw a little bit of money at the pick position. He's not a special player, but if there's one thing that we can look at that's really, really good for the Cardinals, he hasn't missed a game in the last 4 years, which either means he's going to miss games this year, or we're finally going to get some defensive linemen that are durable. And so Nichols, who hasn't missed a game in 4 years, and, mind you, also has played over 600 snaps each of the last 4 years. So he's been durable, and he's played a lot. So he had 600, like last year, 615. The year before, his first year with the Raiders, played 804, 71% of the snaps. But he plays 55 to 70% of his team's defensive snaps, and that might be higher than what the Cardinals want from him, but to get a guy who you can count on to play that much, that's really good. Statistically, there's nothing you're going to be like, wow. He had 1.5 sacks each of the last 2 years, 44 tackles, 48 tackles, 4 tackles for loss each season. He did have 11 quarterback hits in 2022 and only 2 last season. But there is a little bit upside because as a nose tackle in 2020 for the Bears, he had 5 sacks and 13 quarterback hits. Also had an interception. He's just a real decent player. And when we went into the season last year, we didn't feel that there were maybe decent players on their roster on the defensive line. And so to get a guy who is a legitimate NFL starter, 94 games in his career, 83 starts of the last 4 seasons, he started every game except for 2. So you really like that, and he has positional versatility because he's played both tackle and end in terms of those interior positions, so you can play him in multiple spots. I like the move, and the contract isn't too burdensome, and so yeah, nothing wrong with that. He's not a name that anyone was excited about. He's 27 years old. He will be 28 this season, and so you get him a 3-year deal. And you see the trend is that the Cardinals aren't signing 30 plus, like they're not signing age 30 and up guys. They're all in that second contract. These are middling players on their second contract that they're building the foundation of their roster, which I like. What do you like about Nichols? Because to me, he's just a this is even better than say Carlos Watkins last year, I think.
Yeah, it's just one of those signings where, I think you hit the nail on the head on a lot of things. Like, first off, you have a guy that, has been healthy and productive. And yes, he's not highly productive, but he's playing at a higher rate than he'll have. Well, we shouldn't say have to, but we hope that he has to play in Arizona. I mean, let's not jinx it, obviously. And he's been productive. I mean, the numbers aren't eye-popping, but that's what you get for $9 million a year. You don't get anything more. And like you said, I think the 54 snaps will be closer to where they want him to be. Maybe closer to 60, but I think the 71 the previous year. The ironic thing was he was probably more productive this year, playing only 54% of the snaps.
Yeah.
He had obviously the touchdown, which helps, but he had the same amount of sacks, 1.5 sacks. He had 48 combined tackles, 4 tackles for loss. He had less QB hits, but I mean, he was a nice fit along that defensive line in Las Vegas. With Nichols, you get a guy that fits he fits what the regime is looking for in terms of play style, in terms of size and athleticism. That's the thing with Nichols, is he is a very, very athletic player at the position. I think if you are into that RAS score stuff, I think he scored like over a 9, which is really, really high.
It's really high.
And so, he was a small school guy out of Delaware. And so to see him come in and produce the way he has, that's such a cool situation for guys like that. And I think he's a guy that's going to come in at, 6'4". They list him now at 313. He's going to give them a nice rotational defensive lineman. And this is what Jess and I talked about off the air, and we're going to talk about with Justin Jones too in a second, is Nichols gives them a guy that what you have. He's a mid-level NFL starter, and your goal is to now find a player in the draft that's better than him.
Yes. Justin Jones. Oh, go, keep going.
Well, and so that's what I was going to say. So that's the goal, that one of here, Justin Jones, is not starting in 2025.
Yeah, and the guy that they bring in, the other guy is Justin Jones of the Bears. Played 4 seasons for the Chargers, former third-round pick, another big athletic guy, 6'3", 309, guy that ran the 40 and 5.09 back in the day. And he does, I will say this is the one that Cardinals have taken a little bit of heat for, because it's 3 years and more than $30 million, which basically lines up with the contract that they gave a couple of years ago to Jordan Phillips. And Jordan Phillips was coming off a historic year of 9 sacks at his size. Now, granted, Jordan Phillips, an extremely large individual, while Justin Jones is more just of a normal big defensive lineman. I believe the Cardinals are paying him because they believe he has upside that he hasn't reached, and I think there's some potential, because if you look at last season, you saw a spike in pass rushing production overall. He's another guy who hasn't missed any games of the last 2 seasons, and played a lot. So he's played over 700 snaps. He played over 700 snaps each of the last 2 seasons. He's been, over the last 5, 487. So his lowest count is 487. But you look at the last 2 years, over 700 snaps we played for the Bears. But last year he had 4.5 sacks. And it's not just that, but he also had 17 quarterback hits, which was more than twice that he'd had in any year of his career. Now, if you look at he's steadily produced a little bit more in the pass rush sack-wise, half a sack, no sack, 1 sack, 3, and then 4.5 last year. But I think you look at how he was used last year, and you look at his production around the line of scrimmage. So he has 34 total tackles for loss in his career. 22 of them came over the last 2 seasons. He had double-digit tackles for loss each of the last 2 seasons. He has 7.5 of his 12 career sacks over the last 2 seasons. And he has 37 total quarterback hits in his career. 17 came from last season. And so this, I think, might be an upside. Like this is the biggest deal that they've given to a player in free agency by Monty Ossenfort to date. And I think it's the one where he's swinging a little bit for the fence on a guy that's not going to cost crazy amounts, but still give you good production.
Yeah, and I think that's what they're looking for, as you said. It's one of those situations where they're taking a chance. It's a little more than what he probably has earned, but he is a guy with, like you said, he's shown the last 2 years to have a little higher upside. So, I mean, you look at it the last 2 years in Chicago on a bad, porous Bears defense, or not great Bears defense. I mean, obviously 2022, they're the worst defense in the NFL. Last year, they improved to 20th, coinciding with his career year, like you said. 3 sacks, 4.5 sacks, 17 quarterback hits, but those 22 tackles for loss, that's what really catches your eye. And again, he's doing it slightly above where they'll want to be, 68, 69% of snaps the last 2 years. Drop down, 10% of snaps. So you're talking maybe, 37 to 40 snaps less in a season, get him in the 700 range, and you've got what you're looking for. And so again, I would agree. This is a guy that they're,
this is one of their gamble. This is a gamble move on this one.
And it's not a gamble in if he's going to be good. It's a gamble if he's going to outplay that contract.
Right.
Because like you said, or play up to that contract. I guess that's the better way to explain it, is that, if he's going to be able to play up to that contract, and if he's not, it's not going to
because if he has 5 sacks and 15 tackles for loss, you'll be like, okay, like you won't think that it's a value contract, but like if he jumps up to 8, if he has 7-8 sacks, 60 tackles, and 20 quarterback hits, then you're like, oh, like it's really like if he gets 3 sacks more than his 4.5, you're thinking he's worth $10 million a year. At 4.5 sacks, you're like, you're overpaying probably. But I think this is of the moves, like Bunting, like Murphy Bunting is a slight gamble, but I think the biggest one that they believe the most in its upside is in terms of investment, is they believe the most in what Jones is going to do.
Right, exactly.
The next guy that came up in free agency was Mack Wilson, linebacker out of New England, a guy that's played almost all special teams in his career, but showed a little pass rushing juice last season. He gets a 3-year deal. He basically gets the same deal that 2 years ago Dennis Gardeck got, because Dennis Gardeck got a 3-year, $12 million deal. He gets 3 years, $12.75 million. Mack Wilson, who's he started in 2019 when he was a rookie. He was a starter for that Browns team, and not a bad starter, productive in terms, like as you saw from that season. If you look at kind of what they got from Chris Barnes, like he was the same type of player Chris Barnes was his rookie year. 82 tackles, had an interception, 7 pass breakups, forced fumble, and a sack. But he hasn't been really a full-time starter since. Since he has 32 career starts, 14 of them came in his first year, and then basically the last 2 years when he played for the Patriots, He became a stud special teamer. He played 284 special teams snaps in 2022, over 300 this last season. But he also played over 300 snaps on defense, over 230 the previous year. And while he did get some work at the edge, and he had 3.5 sacks last year that came kind of late in the year, doesn't this feel like this is a Josh Woods type signing, only they're investing more money in him? Because Josh Woods was also, a year ago, they gave him a 1-year deal. He was a special teams player and a potential guy on defense, and he knocked the door down, became a defensive rotational guy, was a starter down the stretch after Kaiser White got hurt. And I feel like this is kind of the same move, only on a 3-year deal. I think they think more highly of Wilson than they did Woods a year ago.
Yeah, and it's interesting that they grabbed him and paid him like a potential starter.
Yeah, they paid him almost as much per year as they did Kaiser White, a guy that they knew what he was.
And so it'll be interesting to see how this kind of plays out, what their game plan is with him. Because like you said, it's not like the snaps have been, 27% of the snaps, that's not a crazy number by any means. So we'll see how this works out. They may have a vision for them. And you and I have talked quite a bit about the fact that Jonathan Gannon and by proxy, obviously, Nick Rallis's defense is probably going to play to the strengths of backers a little bit. And so now you get a guy in Mac Wilson who has shown flashes, especially at the end of last season, as a guy that can play. So you wonder, is that what they're looking at? Is that what they're seeing? Is that what they're believing in? So we'll see, man, because it's going to be interesting.
It's, last year, I think the Mac Wilson, granted, it's more money. It's more an investment. Last year was like 1- and 2-year deals, but I feel like one thing that Monty Ossenfort tries to do is to get guys, and this is for value purpose, is to bring guys in who he sees starter potential in, but they haven't really been starters yet. That's Mac Wilson this year, Josh Woods last year. I guess the best example we have of that is Hjalte Froholt. And we felt all last offseason that they're not going to go into the season with Hjalte Froholt, and that seemed to be totally the plan. And the way you hear his teammates talk about him, Hjalte Froholt, by the way, is the strongest guy in that. He is the strongest guy on that offensive line. His teammates all believe in him. He moves really well, and so that was totally a move. And they gave him a 2-year deal. That was a projected move that I think really points to kind of like the philosophy that Ossenfort's got, like the Justin Jones investment, the Mac Jones investment, and then the last guy that we have so far, and that's DJ Dallas. He's been the special teams and return guy and like back of the roster running back for the Seattle Seahawks for the last few years. They give him on a 3-year, almost 3 years and $8.25 million. That's also paying a guy, and maybe this also points to the investment in Dallas, and Wilson also is a concerted effort to invest on special teams as well, to make sure that you have great special teams play, perhaps. But I also see it as more projection-based. Like you bring in DJ Dallas on that 3-year deal, and you're hoping that he can be more than just a kick returner or more than just special teams, and you're going to allow him to compete with Emardi Mercado. Maybe he can be the third down back and maybe even be the backup as you look, because Michael Carter's under contract for only 1 more year. It's just kind of an interesting thing, is because they're taking little risks. They're not swinging for the fences. They're trying to hit some singles and doubles, it kind of looks like. And I think their biggest swing so far has been for Justin Jones. And everything else is kind of, hey, for baseball terms, I already even know the offense. They're dinking and dunking. They're doing check down moves with intermediate passes thrown in, right?
Right, and you look at DJ Dallas, and I wrote about it a little bit today. It's interesting to me that their focus has really been on defense and special teams, right? Like, and the special teams was actually good last year, but they're like, it can get better. And then the defense was obviously bad and it can only go up. And so you look at it, it makes sense. And so it also makes you wonder what the plan is.
It'd be interesting to hear. And I'll say this: the first media availability that we have, we'll think we'll get answered questions. No, Monty doesn't give us anything. Canada doesn't give us anything. So the hope is maybe on one of these player introductions that one of the players can crack the door open just a little bit into kind of what those conversations were in terms of what their plan is for them. Coming up next on the Rise of Seaward podcast, Arizona Cardinals talk. And let's move on, talk about a little bit on the re-signings and the losses, and also what is coming next. That's coming next on the Rise of Seaward. We're back on the Rise of Seaward podcast, Arizona Cardinals talk on the web. Let's talk the players who've re-signed, the players who've lost. In fact, there's only one to deal with, and that's Lecky Fotu. Only one Cardinals player thus far, as of the time we started the show, has found a deal elsewhere, and that is Lecky Fotu, who gets a one-year deal up to $4 million with the New York Jets. But I thought from the signing of Bilal Nichols, that pretty much signaled his departure, that they were looking to do better than what they had. But Lecky's departure now also means no more 2020 draft class. Although he I will admit, one of my favorite picks out of the draft, just didn't quite reach what I thought he could be.
And his was mostly just health. I mean,
it was.
He
and
Rashad Lawrence.
Oh yes, my goodness! But last year he did develop into a reliable starter. He had his best pass rushing production, and was kind of solid. Like he fit that role. Like when they decided to say, okay, you're going to play nose tackle. He played nose tackle, played first and second down. He played it really well. Later in the year, he played some other. He moved around a little bit more because of injuries on the line. But yeah, but he's not a significant loss because the guys that they brought in thus far are better players than Lecky's been, and so you can't really complain about that.
Real quick, Jess, because I just saw this, and it's old, so I'm not like breaking any news, but that Danielle Hunter contract that I was trying to find earlier is basically a 2-year fully guaranteed contract of $50 million. So like that, when you're talking about going back real quick to Justin Jones and money, like that's the question. Would you rather have Justin Jones, Bilal, Nichols, and Mac Wilson, or just Danielle Hunter? Like that's, I wanted to get that in there real quick because I just found it.
It's the same concept as basically what they spent on their 3 and 4 defensive players in free agency is what it costs to get Christian Wilkins. And while we all love Christian Wilkins, that's a different story. But they've brought back a few players, and more players are likely to come. LJ Collier signed earlier, so they would
I thought that was a no-brainer, right?
And I think it was
for both sides, really.
For both sides, because and the deal is basically it's slightly more than the league minimum. He liked it here. I think he liked the way he was being used. He saw some success. They bring back Tristan Colon on a 1-year deal. They'd already re-signed Carter O'Donnell, Jesse Luketa, and then Greg Dortch was tendered his qualified offer. They also bring back Chris Barnes with the return of Chris Barnes and the signing of Mac Wilson, or the agreed terms with, because the signings haven't happened. It feels like Josh Woods is gone. They bring back Blake Gillikin, their punter. That was a no-brainer. And they also
great no-brainer there.
Yeah, and then they also, it was announced reported earlier today, Keith Ismail, probably a guy most of you don't know who he is. He was the Cardinals' backup center all last year, and he didn't play a single snap on offense last year because of the yell to Froholt. But they liked him well enough to bring him back. He was on the roster all last season. There were a few games when he was inactive, but I think he was active for every single game, and he just didn't play. He didn't appear in a handful of them. He only played in 13 games. But Ismail, a guy who he's depth. And this is where we find is that they haven't made any. So they signed starters, and then on offense, it's been depth. Like Tristan Colon, he started 4 games. He was one of the 4 starters at left guard last season. Keith Ismail, he's depth. Carter O'Donnell, he's depth. LJ Collier is a starter, but can you count on him? He's never been healthy his career, so you hope that he's going to do that. Greg Dortch, as much as people love Greg Dortch, light the Dortch and all that, come on, he's going to be at best probably wide receiver 4, and he's going to compete for Rondell Moore for playing time. And if they re-sign Hollywood Brown, you've got Marv, you've got Michael Wilson, you've got Hollywood Brown. When is Greg Dortch playing?
Right. I mean, he'll get some snaps, but yeah, it's going to be low, and that's fine. I mean, we've talked about this. Those are the things that need to start happening. Those are where these things are coming into play, and what you're wanting to see here. And if you don't have that, and again, this is not a shot at Greg Dortch by any means necessary, but if he's, a top 2 receiver on your team, your offense is probably going to look like it did last year, which, ended up not being bad, but
it was it wasn't good because of the receiver play. That was
right.
Because of Kyler James Conner and Trey McBride.
Right. So yeah. So that's what that's what the idea is. And it's for every single position. I mean, like we said, outside of Bunting, Murphy, and then Justin Jones, every single one of these guys presents the opportunity to upgrade over them in the next year.
Yeah.
And that's what they're, but it also shows a stark improvement from last year. So like, that's how this should kind of be looking over the next year, is that they look to to improve over the previous season, but with the room to upgrade to something better. And then having guys like Jones and Nichols and Mac Wilson, if you find a draft pick that hits, that's literally just what the goal should be. And then just like we're talking about with our guy, Dortch, right? Like, go ahead and have Dortch, and if he ends up being your 4 or 5, fantastic. If he ends up bringing your 2, and I can say 3 is kind of a coin flip, then you're probably in more trouble than you want to admit to.
Right. And I think there's one thing, because what's expected over the next day or so is some other re-signings. There'll be more re-signings, but that will include Elijah Wilkinson and Aaron Brewer. And so when we talked about they need to address the left guard position, it doesn't look, thus far, especially if they bring back Wilkinson, it does not appear that they plan to go out and look for a different left guard, that they will roll with the players that they've got. They'll between Elijah Wilkinson, Tristan Colon, last year rookie John Gaines, maybe Keith Ismail, you're going to try and put it together like they did last year, and which financially I guess makes sense, especially because maybe the coaches, maybe they felt that left guard was adequate last season between those players. With Cologne, you get center guard versatility.
Yeah.
With Wilkinson, you get guard tackle. He's been a starting right tackle before. Just the one thing, if we're talking about what they haven't done yet this offseason, which is kind of glaring at us right now, is nothing's happened to receiver. Nothing's happened at tackle. And while we didn't know if they would do it, then nothing still happened to backup quarterback. And the backup quarterbacks are dwindling. So it's like the ones that you would even care about. Like there's Tyler Huntley. I think it'd be a good fit. But it appears, and let's be honest, it looked like, while we all think that they probably should get a better backup quarterback, I think they believe enough in Clayton Tune to be that guy. And so, but yeah, receiver, whether that's Hollywood coming back or a different receiver, that Deontay Johnson rumor that was going around, thank goodness that's gone. He already got traded. And then tackle. What are they going to do at tackle? Are they really going to go deep into, are they going to go into the draft without another option other than Kelvin Beachum? That's an interesting question to pose right now.
Yeah, you have to wonder what the plan is and where the plan is moving forward from here, because as of now, it doesn't feel like there is one. So we'll see how that all kind of plays out here. But, for now, right now, this is one of those situations where this is a situation where they've got some work to do. Excuse me. And we'll see if they add more to that or if it's just what it is right now and nothing else comes of it. So.
And with that, we'll wrap up this edition, episode 523 of the Rise Up Secret podcast, the best of Cardinals talk. Lou and Seth and I will be back later this week. I'm sure we'll have more free agent stuff to talk about then. But until then, that's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening as always. We'll be back again soon.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, See Red, and of course, Rise Up, See Red.
Roll!